She portrayed a polished secretary in one of the cleanest television programs ever. Was the filthiest American comic? However, behind the scenes in Hollywood, Redd Foxx and Nancy Culp had a secret that surprised everyone. It wasn't a passing fancy. Something more dangerous, something deeper. And far more hazardous in their day. Both of their careers could be destroyed if they were discovered. They nevertheless went ahead and did it. Finally, decades later, the truth came to light. And everything you believe to be true about them is altered. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on August 28, 1921, Nancy Culp was born. Being the only kid in a family that valued education, they lived it. Her mother taught before becoming a principal. She had a superintendent for a granddad. In pursuit of better prospects, her family relocated to Florida by the time she was a teenager. Nancy became something unique as a result of the combination of rigorous education and Southern sunshine. A lady who would gain expertise in languages, media, the military, and Hollywood itself in the future. Not only was Nancy intelligent, she was invincible. She graduated with a degree in journalism from Florida State College for Women in 1943. She went one step further and earned 2 master's degrees from the University of Miami in French and English. It wasn't just for show. Even while still in school, she was writing feature articles for the Miami Beach Tropics, where she profiled celebrities like Myrna Loy and Clark Gable. Her calm, polished voice captivated listeners, a result of her keen intellect and passion for storytelling. It wasn't limited to academics either. She knew how to move in any setting, from lecture halls to red carpets, and she was a member of Pi Beta Phi. The conflict followed. Nancy decided to leave her studies and join the Navy in 1944, believing that she had a bright future. She joined the All-Female Reserve Unit, or WAVES. He attained the rank of lieutenant junior very rapidly. Not a ranked officer, not a secretary, nor a nurse. Up until 1946, she served and received medals such as the American Campaign and Good Conduct Awards. She later acknowledged that she enjoyed being in an all-female setting. It was more than simply comfort, though. Independence, leadership, and demonstrating her ability to compete in a male-dominated world were the main goals. She continued to move quickly once the battle was over. She resumed her career in journalism, continuing to write about celebrities. Something was different this time, though. She relocated to Hollywood in 1951 after getting married to Charles Malcolm Dacus. She intended to use her writing abilities behind the scenes as a publicity assistant at MGM. However, renowned filmmaker George Cukor noticed something that others had overlooked after only 3 weeks on the job. Beyond the typewriter, he noticed a star. Nancy was persuaded to try out by Cukor and Billy Gordon, the casting director. She starred in The Model and The Marriage Broker, her first motion picture, that same year. The woman who had previously written about stars was now one of them. She accumulated almost 30 film credits during the next 20 years. She portrayed the maid of Audrey Hepburn in Sabrina. She played Miss Grunecker, the eccentric character in The Parent Trap. Even though she played a lot of modest, occasionally uncredited roles, she had a way of remaining in your mind. She was able to shine without a spotlight. Her speciality became stern women with unexpected softness and quirky spinsters. Her name may be unknown to you, but you were familiar with her face. She even provided the voice of a horse in the 1970 Disney film The Aristocats. However, nothing was known about her private life. In 1951, on April Fool's Day, she wed Dacus. The timing seemed like a clue beforehand. Just when Nancy's TV career was beginning to take off, they got divorced in 1961, 10 years later. She steered clear of any inquiries regarding Dacus, never remarried, and never mentioned the relationship. It was said that he was gay. The marriage was seen by others as a front. Nancy, in any case, held that chapter tightly. She lived alone after the divorce and never again had a romantic relationship. Given how expertly she portrayed lonely folks, one may wonder how much of that was acting. She made her television debut on The Bob Cummings Show. Wearing a pith helmet, she portrayed the quirky bird watcher Pamela Livingstone. It worked, it was humorous, and it was strange. Nancy made this eccentric into a memorable figure. Even though she only made 15 appearances between 1955 and 1959, it was sufficient. Paul Henning, the creator of the show, never forgot her. Nancy was cast in the Beverly Hillbillies as Jane Hathaway, another eccentric bird lover, but this one would go on to become famous. In the 1950s and early 1960s, Nancy appeared on all of the main television programs before the Beverly Hillbillies. She portrayed a drunk waitress on Maverick, a curtsy coach on Perry Mason, and a maid on I Love Lucy. She was always unforgettable, whether she was teaching math or being a nosy neighbor. She appeared on My Three Sons as two distinct characters in 1962 alone. She could play any part, do it flawlessly, and in a single scene, make the audience laugh or feel something, which is why casting directors adored her. Everything revolved around her relationship with George Cukor. He transformed her life. He was more than a director. In 1950s Hollywood, he was one of the few guys who came out as gay. He also had an eye for unconventional talent. He gave Nancy more than simply her first movie role. When no one else did, he had faith in her. He continued to stand by her, even after one of her scenes was removed from A Star Is Born without his consent. Although Cukor had experience working with the industry's top stars, he spotted Nancy Culp's promise and made time for her. That says it all. Then the spinster who was short on love arrived. They want a person who would stand out from a group of country people, had a crisp voice, and a smart appearance. For this reason, CBS chose Nancy Culp to play Miss Jane Hathaway. It was a straightforward but great notion. Place an elegant, well-mannered woman next to a group of naive Ozark millionaires. It succeeded. Nancy was a fantastic fit for the Clampett's wild, crazy energy because of her stiff stance, serious tone, and pointed jawline. She wasn't merely an inflexible secretary, though. She was twisted by the authors. In her heart, she harbored feelings for the attractive but dim-witted Jethro. They also played with her genuine name, which added to the humor. Nancy Culp changed her name to Jane Nancy Hathaway. The character, who would go down as one of the most legendary sidekicks in television history, gained depth from the subtle inside joke. Her efforts were eventually recognized in earnest by 1967. In a comedy, Nancy received an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actress. It happened during the 5th season of the Beverly Hillbillies, when the program was still among the top 10 most watched in the United States with a 23.4 rating. Among the well-known opponents she faced were Frances Bavier from The Andy Griffith Show and Marion Lorne from Bewitched, who won posthumously. However, Nancy's nomination had a deeper significance. It demonstrated the depth of life she brought to a potentially lifeless character. It all worked, the tight bun in her hair, the clumsy birdwatching, and the intense need. And that wasn't even the first time she had portrayed a woman who was obsessed with birds. She played Pamela Livingstone in a similar role on the Bob Cummings Show years ago. That previous position served as Miss Jane's model. On set and among admirers, Nancy was already referred to as the Bird Lady by the late 1960s. Nancy Culp played Miss Jane for 9 whole years, appearing in 274 episodes overall. With Nielsen ratings of 36.0 and 39.1 for its first 2 seasons, the show was the top-rated program on American television from 1962 to 1971. It is unheard of even now. Of its episodes, 16 remain in the top 100 most watched shows ever. Not only was it entertaining, but it helped to define a whole genre. Nancy's contribution was crucial. Her persona remained ingrained in people's memory despite never changing her attire or pursuing fame. When people thought of the Beverly Hillbillies, even 45 years later, they saw her wearing a button-up shirt, holding a clipboard, and glaring at Jethro once more. CBS's notorious rural purge, in which they eliminated anything that seemed too rustic, included the show's demise. At that time, however, Miss Jane Hathaway was already a mainstay of popular culture. Nancy Culp's divorce from Charles Malcolm Dacus in 1961 was a significant turning point in her life. 10 years had passed since their April 1, 1951, marriage. After the divide, an odd thing occurred. She was never again spotted with a male. Never. During a period when Hollywood demanded that women maintain appearances by being associated with attractive men, Nancy completely disappeared from the dating spotlight. The gossip mags noticed. Industry insiders did the same. It was nearly unheard of for an actress with a successful career to keep her love life completely private. Rather of going on romantic dates, Nancy spent her days working for charities and with female friends and co-workers. People began to whisper. In Hollywood, particularly throughout the 1960s and 1970s, rumors proliferated quickly. Soon after, many people thought they understood why she kept her personal life so secret. Not only did Nancy shun men sexually, but she also avoided being photographed with them, even for innocuous marketing shots. That was intentional, not just out of the ordinary. Then, in 1989, Nancy provided the world a clue at the age of 68, 2 years before her death. She spoke with Boz Hadley, a reporter who specializes in covering LGBTQ+ celebrities in Hollywood. Her words were obvious, yet they weren't loud or audacious. She used a lot of metaphor in her response. In your opinion, do opposites attract? She questioned herself. I would respond that I'm the other kind. I've seen that similar things tend to cluster together. That was her truth, calmly spoken for anyone who would listen. She was doing it with precision. When discussing sexuality in show business, Nancy once referred to it as the fatal question. She was correct. Saying something incorrectly may ruin a career in her time. However, Nancy made her own path. She was used to that bird metaphor. She frequently employed it, slipping it into interviews during the 1970s and 1980s. She played a character in Beverly Hillbillies who belonged to a group that watched birds. One more layer of subdued symbolism for the people who got it. Journalists noticed. Neither did she say too much nor too little. Then came the moment that took everyone by surprise, an appearance on a game show in the 1970s. Long before other public personalities dared to be upfront, Nancy Culp was the first to look directly into the camera and declare that she would never date again. That was the kind of surprise that Hollywood disliked, especially from someone that Americans watched in their living rooms on a weekly basis. The executives went into a frenzy. She might lose roles in the future, according to some, but it made no difference. When Nancy finally spoke her truth aloud, the guessing game was finished. Nancy had evolved from a past TV personality by 1984. She aspired to serve in Congress. She was 62 when she ran for the U.S. the 9th District of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. She returned home, lived in a modest country cottage close to Mifflintown, and ran a Democratic campaign in a strongly Republican region. Stronger environmental regulations, lower military expenditure, and higher taxes for the wealthy were all part of her progressive platform. She was unaffected by the fact that she had never held public office before. I'm new to politics, but I'm not new to life, she assured people. People paid attention. Her buddies in Hollywood backed her up. At his Los Angeles home, Ed Asner held a fundraiser. Well-known people appeared. White Betty and Harper Valerie. Just that evening brought in $28,000. It appeared as though Nancy may win unexpectedly. However, she was pulled out from beneath her just as momentum was beginning to build. Buddy Ebsen, her old co-star, stepped in, but he wasn't helpful. He recorded a radio commercial for Bud Schuster, her rival. Ebsen claimed that Nancy was too liberal and that she didn't comprehend hard-working Pennsylvanians in his well-known Jed Clampett voice. The commercial ran 147 times in 2 weeks. It was a powerful blow. What was worse? Pennsylvania wasn't even where Ebsen was born. It was Nancy. That's where she grew up. He was a Californian. However, people who had grown up watching the Beverly Hillbillies gave his voice weight. Ebsen donated $100 to her opponent's campaign, further personalizing the situation. Nancy first heard the advertisement while she was seated at an Altoona diner. Her hands were shaking. This went beyond politics. The act was treacherous. Even on set, Ebsen had always seemed challenging to her. She never anticipated this, even though their political opinions had diverged. Even after all these years, she would not allow anyone to bring up his name in front of her. She maintained a professional demeanor when discussing the show in interviews. But she was explicit in private. She thought he was dead. The outcome of the election was terrible. Her loss on November 6, 1984, was severe. She received 59,449 votes. It was 117 to 203 for Schuster. It is only 33.6% of his 66.4%. It wasn't near. Republicans throughout were cheering Reagan's resounding victory and re-election. But Nancy's defeat wasn't just due to that. Ebsen's ad was painful. She was dismissed by voters. It was believed by some that a Hollywood actress couldn't possibly comprehend politics. It's ironic because Ronald Reagan made the same leap and was elected president. However, the door slammed shut for Nancy. Never again did she run. The campaign was concluded. Her aspirations for politics were dashed. And so was whatever relationship that remained with Buddy Ebsen. Her rage never subsided. Friends claimed that whenever his name was mentioned, her mood would immediately deteriorate. "He's not the nice old Jed Clampett you saw on the show," she once said. She meant it. In Hollywood, their quarrel became legendary, with individuals subtly picking sides. On December 9, 1922, Redd Foxx was born John L. Roy Sanford in St. Louis. At the age of 3, his father left him. He has a half-Seminole mother. He was raised on the south side of Chicago in poverty. Because he never stopped grinning, he was known as Smiley when he was little. He began playing washboard in a band at the age of 13. He had no plan, no money, just big goals, and raw nerves when he was 16 and jumping freight trains to New York. Redd Foxx, a combination of his hair and complexion epithet Red and a chic take on Fox, modeled by baseball player Jimmy Fox, was his moniker in Baltimore nightclubs. That moniker stayed, and everything changed the instant he took the stage. Even though he only received $25 to record Laugh of the Party in 1955, the Dirty Comedy album sold over 15 million copies. He released almost 35 records by 1961, some of which had titles so graphic they were not allowed in white stores. He published almost 50 of them throughout time, selling 10 million copies overall. He was without a doubt the most filthy record ever made. There was no radio play for these albums. Particularly in black communities, they were offered under the counter and quickly gained popularity. He was even signed to a Frank Sinatra label. He was already a legend before he was even seen on television. He and Slappy White, their sidekick, went on the Chitlin circuit. In 1947, they were making $450 a week, which was a significant sum of money. In contrast to most acts, they did not wear blackface. They didn't hesitate. With jokes no one else dared to say, they spoke the unvarnished truth. White clubs were off limits to them due to segregation. Fox got freedom as a result of the rejection. He became more sardonic, grimier, and bolder in his comedy. Fox was a dishwasher in Harlem during the 1940s. He worked with a teenage Malcolm X, and because of their hair, they called each other the Chicago Red and the Detroit Red. They had a close relationship. Together, they sold stolen zoot outfits, slept on roofs, and hustled. Fox claims that they even joined the Communist Party, but mainly because of the sandwiches and white women. It wasn't until Malcolm's life took a turn for the worse that their friendship ended. It wasn't just on stage that Fox rebelled. He pretended to have heart issues in order to avoid the draft when World War II arrived by eating half a bar of soap. It succeeded. He did not participate in the battle after failing the physical. He also recorded 5 other songs in 1946. At all costs, he was determined to remain in the entertainment industry. In 1970, he got his big break when Norman Lear offered him to star in Steptoe and Son, a British television program, in the US. After the success of All in the Family, Lear sought to replicate that enchantment. In honor of his late brother, Fox's rendition was renamed Sanford and Son. When it debuted in January 1972, it immediately became popular. Los Angeles is what served as the setting, and heartily and humorously depicted black working-class life. Fox received 3 consecutive Emmy nominations and a Golden Globe by 1973. Sanford and Son spent the majority of its 6 seasons in the Nielsen Top 10. His grumpy junk salesman persona, Fred Sanford, became a household name. Every time he pretended to have a heart attack and said, "I'm coming to join you, Elizabeth," America responded with laughter. Fans were unaware that those sequences were based on his actual draft evading stunt. However, success has a cost. Fox's private life was in disarray. He had an early divorce from his first marriage. Before she reportedly took $110,000, Betty Jean Harris, his second wife, ran his companies. He requested the return of the money and was granted a restraining order. Domestic violence was alleged against him by his third wife. Only 3 months were spent in his fourth marriage. Behind the scenes, he became addicted to cocaine. A gold Coke spoon was fastened around his neck. On the set, he snorted. The money disappeared even though millions were made. The IRS overran his house in Vegas by 1989. They took everything. $12,000 in cash, his ukulele, 7 automobiles, and Elvis's watch. Even the necklace he wore. His unpaid taxes totaled $755,000, but interest and penalties added up to more than $2.5 million. TV captured the entire event. Standing outside in his panties, Redd Foxx, a comic titan, watches his life being taken away. He was fighting backstage even though everyone else was laughing with him. NBC and Fox came to odds. The show's nearly non-existent black writers and producers infuriated me. It had enough white producers to cast a Tarzan movie, he added. Ownership was what he demanded. He left when they didn't agree. He was sued by NBC for $10 million. In 1977, frustrated with being underappreciated and ignored, he quit Sanford and Son for a new variety show. On paper, at least, they couldn't have been more different. One was an outspoken, unvarnished comic from the Vegas Strip who was well known for his dirty party records. The other was an actress who played a prim secretary on one of America's most family-friendly sitcoms. She was quiet and bookish. However, Nancy Culp and Redd Foxx managed to connect. Behind the bright lights of Hollywood, they had something genuine. It all started in the late 1960s. At a function in Los Angeles for charity. Playing the prim and polite Miss Hathaway since 1962, Nancy gained fame for her role in the Beverly Hillbillies. But Redd was one of the first black comedians to appear for white audiences in Las Vegas, and he had already released over 50 comedy records. In the 1970s, they first crossed paths right before Redd's big break on Sanford and Son. Despite the fact that some in their immediate vicinity were taken aback by the match, they clicked right away. Initially, intellectually rather than romantically. Civil rights were very important to both of them. Both were proponents of harnessing celebrity for a greater good. Both were also fed up with the phony Hollywood atmosphere. Nancy had degrees in journalism, French, and English. She was a former Navy member. Redd was raised on the streets of St. Louis and learned his lessons from adversity. And refined for years on the circuit in Chitlin. However, they both enjoyed reading, politics, and having awkward conversations. They could converse for hours about language, humor, justice, and race. Witnesses described them as magnetic. No pretenses, no flirting, just an honest connection. As the years went by, they continued to cross paths at social gatherings, network gatherings, and studio spaces. They hardly spoke in public. In private, however, their chemistry was evident. They were known to stay up late discussing ideas and joking over cocktails, according to stagehands and insiders. Redd was profound, serious, and very private despite his crude quips, while Nancy was smarter, bolder, and funnier than her TV character. They weren't quite opposites. They were aware that, for reasons other than Hollywood politics, their friendship had to be hidden. It was in the 1960s and 1970s. Just 0.7% of marriages in the United States were multiracial in 1970. It remained at 1.3% by 1980. Interracial romances were considered career death by studios who feared losing Southern audiences. It was deemed extremely risky to even predict who was attending dinner. Producers behind the scenes cautioned their actors not to get involved or be caught. Furthermore, Nancy had considerably more to lose. Many people thought she was lesbian or bisexual, even though she never came out formally. Being a member of the LGBTQ+ community could have destroyed your career in that day and age. Private detectives were employed by the studios. Morality clauses were in contracts. Being spotted with the incorrect person could result in your blacklist being removed. Therefore, Redd and Nancy were willing to risk everything to be together in public. Redd was carrying his own burdens. He was not merely edgy. He was notoriously scandalous. His comedies were soiled, unvarnished, and unrepentant. He lost millions of dollars, went through a string of nasty divorces, and once made $4 million in a year before going bankrupt. He was tough but bright. In 1977, he left his co-star in the dark after walking away from Sanford and Son due to a contract dispute. Already, networks were wary. He might die in one more scandal. What about Nancy? They would also drag her into it. They therefore said nothing. But a change occurred in 1989. Nancy alluded to a lost opportunity with a bold coworker during an interview. She didn't give names. As she put it, however, birds of a feather flocked together. Everything people read and thought about her was in conflict with it. She commended those whose work defied social conventions. Although it was delicate, anyone listening could tell that it was a whisper from a woman who had lived her entire life in secrecy. In 1990, Nancy received a cancer diagnosis a year later. She had been a smoker for decades before the risks were recognized. The disease spread quickly. Chemotherapy sapped her energy and soul. By February 3, 1991, she had disappeared. She was 69 years old. Her death in Palm Desert, California, was peaceful. Her remains were sent back to Pennsylvania. No lavish Hollywood funeral was held, and her truths were not made public. 8 months later, Redd also passed away. On October 11, 1991, he passed out on the set of The Royal Family during rehearsals. At first, everyone assumed it was a prank, with Redd simply reciting his classic Sanford and Son heart attack line. It was real this time, though. "Get my wife," he muttered twice. He never fully recovered. His age was 68. Eddie Murphy paid for his funeral and referred to him as the funniest man he had ever met. Eventually, the silence ended after they passed away. Conversations between friends began. People communicated what they knew after seeing them together at those gatherings in those parts of Hollywood. They talked of the meaningful discussions, the connection, and the laughs. They were not merely companions. They weren't merely teasing. It went beyond that. They were never permitted to show it because it was real. In an image-obsessed town, they had discovered something unique. It was not what was expected. Not white or black, homosexual or straight, star or sidekick. When no one else was there, two souls happened to cross paths. Even though they passed away without disclosing their secret, their tale was not forgotten. Because that kind of love always manages to stick in your memory.